Watch this scenario play out every day across the world. A wedding reception. Hundreds of guests celebrating as another man signs away his freedom. Everyone raises their glasses to toast his happiness, but Arthur Schopenhauer would have seen something completely different happening. The systematic destruction of individual will in favor of biological programming. While everyone celebrates love conquering all, a philosopher who understood human nature better than almost anyone would recognize this moment for what it truly is: the voluntary surrender of the most precious thing any human can possess, complete sovereignty over their own existence. Arthur Schopenhauer spent his entire life studying human nature, and what he discovered about single men will shake everything you believe about relationships, success, and what it really means to be powerful. The philosopher who gave us some of the most brutal truths about human existence understood something that terrifies society to its core. The man who stays single doesn't just avoid the complications of relationships. He gains access to a level of power that married men can never achieve. And there's a reason this truth has been buried under centuries of social conditioning. Think about the last wedding you attended. Everyone celebrated as another man voluntarily surrendered his sovereignty. They called it love, commitment, partnership. Schopenhauer called it something else entirely: the triumph of the species over the individual. Because marriage isn't about your happiness. It's about continuing the human race, even at the cost of your personal power and authentic development. Schopenhauer understood that nature tricks us into reproduction through romantic illusions. That overwhelming feeling you call love? It's biology hijacking your reason, making you believe you need another person to complete you. But the man who sees through this deception, who recognizes the difference between genuine affection and biological programming, he escapes the trap that captures almost everyone else. Here's what Schopenhauer knew that modern society desperately wants to hide: a man can be himself only so long as he is alone. The moment you enter a committed relationship, you begin a process of constant negotiation, endless compromise, perpetual consideration of another person's needs before your own. Your decisions are no longer purely yours. Your time belongs partially to someone else. Your resources get divided. Your attention splits. Your focus fragments. And most devastating of all, your will becomes subordinated to the will of the relationship itself. Schopenhauer called this the objectification of the individual. You stop being a complete person and become half of a couple. Your identity shifts from who you are to who you are in relation to someone else. Husband, partner, provider. These aren't roles you choose. They're cages you construct around your authentic self. But the single man operates from what Schopenhauer called pure will. His desires aren't filtered through another person's fears, limitations, or expectations. When opportunity strikes, he can act immediately. When inspiration hits, he can follow it completely. When his path requires sacrifice, he only sacrifices for himself, not for someone who might resent that sacrifice later. This creates a type of power that's almost incomprehensible to people trapped in relational obligations. The power of pure, undiluted choice. Every decision made from absolute freedom. Every risk calculated only against your own tolerance. Every dream pursued without having to convince another person of its value. Watch what happens when you tell people you choose to stay single. They don't just disagree with your choice. They become genuinely upset. They start listing reasons why you're wrong, why you'll regret it, why you don't understand what you're missing. But here's what's really happening. Your freedom threatens their entire worldview. Your contentment in solitude makes them question their own choices. Your refusal to need what they needed makes them wonder whether they actually needed it at all. Schopenhauer understood this reaction perfectly. People cannot bear to see others living differently because it suggests their own choices might not have been inevitable. The single man represents proof that the things society claims are necessary for happiness, money, status, marriage, family, might actually be obstacles to genuine fulfillment. He's walking evidence that contentment can come from within rather than from external validation. And that evidence is so threatening that society mobilizes every possible force to convince him he's wrong, incomplete, selfish, or doomed to unhappiness. But Schopenhauer knew something profound about human nature. The masses always attack what they cannot understand, and they cannot understand a man who has learned to be complete in himself. There's a particular type of suffering that Schopenhauer identified in his studies of human nature, the suffering that comes from wanting what you cannot have. Most people spend their entire lives in this state, desperately seeking something external to fill an internal void. They think marriage will complete them, but instead it just redirects their wanting toward maintaining the relationship. They trade the pain of loneliness for the pain of constant compromise. But the man who has learned to be alone has transcended this fundamental source of human misery. He doesn't suffer from unfulfilled desires because he's learned to desire only what he can control: his own thoughts, his own actions, his own development. Schopenhauer called this the wisdom of voluntary poverty. Not material poverty, but poverty of need. The less you need from others, the more power you have over your own life. The single man has achieved the ultimate form of this wisdom. He needs nothing from anyone except what they freely choose to give. He doesn't need someone to complete him because he's learned to be whole. He doesn't need someone to validate him because he's developed internal validation. He doesn't need someone to love him because he's learned to love his own existence. This independence creates what Schopenhauer recognized as true strength. Not the strength that comes from dominating others, but the strength that comes from being undominated yourself. The married man might appear powerful in social settings, but his power is always conditional. It depends on maintaining harmony at home. It requires his partner's approval for major decisions. It's constantly threatened by relationship problems. But the single man's power is unconditional. It exists independently of anyone else's mood, opinion, or cooperation. Here's where Schopenhauer's insights become really dangerous to conventional thinking. He understood that most of what we call love is actually a form of mutual dependence dressed up in romantic language. Two incomplete people trying to use each other to feel whole. This creates relationships built on need rather than choice, desperation rather than genuine affection. The single man who has achieved completeness within himself can offer something entirely different. He can choose to share his life without needing to. He can love without clinging. He can commit without surrendering his sovereignty. But here's the paradox that Schopenhauer understood better than anyone. The man who needs relationships the least is often the most attractive to others. There's something magnetic about genuine independence. Something compelling about a person who is complete in themselves. Something irresistible about someone who chooses you rather than needs you. This is why the confident single man often has more romantic options than the desperate married man ever had. Because desperation repels, while completeness attracts. Schopenhauer spent years studying what he called the art of being happy. And one of his most important discoveries was that happiness comes not from getting what you want, but from wanting what you have. The single man who has mastered this art doesn't spend his time longing for a relationship. He spends it appreciating the freedom, peace, and possibilities that solitude provides. He doesn't see his single status as something to endure until he finds someone. He sees it as a conscious choice that gives him access to experiences and opportunities that coupled people can never have. Think about the married men you know. How many of them can spontaneously decide to travel for 3 months? How many can completely change careers without extensive negotiation? How many can pursue a passion that might not be financially profitable without considering how it affects someone else? How many can spend an entire weekend in solitude without explaining themselves to anyone? The single man can do all of these things naturally. His life belongs entirely to him. But there's something even more profound that Schopenhauer understood about the power of solitude. It's in silence and isolation that we encounter our deepest thoughts, our most authentic desires, our truest selves. The constant noise of relationship maintenance, social obligations, and interpersonal drama drowns out the subtle voice of inner wisdom. The single man has access to this wisdom because he's learned to be comfortable with silence, to be at peace with his own company, to listen to what his soul actually wants rather than what society tells him he should want. Schopenhauer called this the development of inner life. While others are constantly reacting to external stimuli, negotiating with other people's emotions, managing interpersonal conflicts, the single man is developing a rich internal world. He's reading philosophy, contemplating existence, creating art, building businesses, exploring ideas that might never be practical, but feed his soul in ways that social interactions never could. This inner development creates a type of strength that's invisible to most people but absolutely essential for genuine happiness. Consider the most powerful men throughout history. Leonardo da Vinci never married, pouring his entire being into art and invention. Isaac Newton remained single, dedicating his life to unlocking the universe's mathematical secrets. Nikola Tesla chose celibacy to focus completely on his revolutionary discoveries. These weren't men who couldn't find relationships. They were men who understood that their highest calling required undivided attention. They recognized what Schopenhauer knew intuitively, that genius demands solitude, that creation requires freedom from distraction, that true achievement flows from minds unburdened by relational obligations. The modern single man who understands this principle operates from the same awareness. While his married friends spend evenings discussing grocery lists and weekend plans, he's designing his future. While they negotiate vacation destinations based on two sets of preferences, he's exploring opportunities that expand his understanding. While they manage household dynamics and relationship maintenance, he's investing in skills, experiences, and insights that compound over time into genuine wisdom and capability. The philosopher understood something that most people never realize. Boredom is not the opposite of happiness. Anxiety is. And marriage, despite all its benefits, is fundamentally a source of anxiety. Will my partner be happy? Are we growing apart? How do I balance my needs with their needs? What happens when we disagree about major decisions? The single man eliminates this entire category of anxiety from his life. His happiness depends only on his own choices, his own development, his own relationship with existence itself. Here's what happens when you truly embrace the power of being single. You stop seeking external validation for your choices. You stop needing other people's approval to feel good about your life. You stop measuring your success by relationship status or social milestones. You start developing what Schopenhauer called genuine individuality, the courage to be exactly who you are, even when that makes others uncomfortable, especially when it makes others uncomfortable. But this transformation doesn't happen overnight. Schopenhauer understood that most men have been conditioned from childhood to believe they're incomplete without a partner. This conditioning runs so deep that the first months or years of chosen solitude often feel uncomfortable. The single man must learn to distinguish between genuine loneliness and social programming. True loneliness is rare and temporary. What most people call loneliness is actually the discomfort of being alone with themselves, of facing their thoughts without distraction, of confronting who they really are beneath all their social performances. The man who pushes through this discomfort discovers something remarkable. Solitude isn't empty. It's full of possibilities, insights, creative energy, and authentic desires that were previously drowned out by the noise of constant social interaction. He learns to enjoy his own company so much that other people's presence becomes a choice rather than a necessity. This shift from needing people to choosing people completely transforms the dynamic of every interaction he has. Watch how differently he moves through the world. At social gatherings, he's genuinely present because he wants to be there, not because he's desperate for connection. In conversations, he speaks authentically because he's not performing for approval. In business settings, he negotiates from strength because his happiness doesn't depend on any particular outcome. In romantic situations, he's attractive precisely because he doesn't need the other person's validation to feel complete. The single man who has achieved this level of self-possession becomes genuinely dangerous to social control mechanisms. He can't be manipulated through his loneliness because he's not lonely. He can't be pressured through his insecurity because he's developed genuine confidence. He can't be controlled through his needs because he's learned to need very little. This makes him unpredictable, which makes him powerful. Schopenhauer observed that most people live their entire lives according to scripts written by others. Get educated, find a job, get married, have children, work until retirement. They never ask whether this script serves their authentic development or merely serves society's need for predictable, controllable citizens. The single man who has rejected this script represents proof that alternative ways of living are possible. That happiness doesn't require following predetermined paths. That fulfillment can come from choices that society doesn't understand or approve of. This is why society works so hard to convince men that staying single is a form of failure. Because the moment men realize they can be complete without relationships, that they can be happy without marriage, that they can be fulfilled without following traditional paths, the entire social order has to reorganize around completely different assumptions. Assumptions that give individuals more power and institutions less control. The man who stays single and thrives doesn't just challenge romantic conventions. He challenges the entire framework of how society organizes itself. He proves that contentment can come from within rather than from external achievement. That meaning can be self-created rather than socially assigned. That power can be personal rather than positional, and these proofs are so threatening that society mobilizes every possible resource to convince him he's wrong. But Schopenhauer knew something that gives the single man ultimate protection against social pressure. Truth doesn't need consensus to be true. Your happiness doesn't require other people's understanding. Your choices don't need their approval. Your life belongs to you alone, and the opinion of people who have never lived your life carries no weight in determining what's best for you. There's a deeper layer to this that Schopenhauer explored in his writings about the will to live. He understood that nature programs us with desires that serve the species, not the individual. The overwhelming urge to couple, to reproduce, to build families, these aren't personal desires. They're biological imperatives disguised as personal preferences. The man who recognizes this distinction gains incredible freedom. He can choose which desires to follow based on whether they serve his authentic development or merely serve nature's reproductive agenda. This awareness allows him to approach relationships, when he chooses them, from a completely different framework. Instead of being driven by unconscious biological programming, he can evaluate potential partners based on genuine compatibility, shared values, and mutual enhancement of each other's growth. Instead of settling for someone because he's afraid of being alone, he can wait for someone who truly adds value to his already complete existence. Instead of compromising his authentic self to maintain a relationship, he can maintain his integrity and attract someone who appreciates him as he actually is. The single man who has achieved this level of consciousness becomes what Schopenhauer would call truly free. Free from social expectations, free from biological programming, free from the need for external validation. This freedom manifests in every area of his life. His career choices aren't limited by the need to provide for a family. His living situation isn't constrained by someone else's preferences. His financial decisions aren't complicated by joint responsibilities. His time is entirely his own to invest in whatever serves his highest development. But perhaps most importantly, his mental energy isn't constantly divided between his own growth and relationship maintenance. The psychological bandwidth that married men spend on communication, compromise, and conflict resolution, he can direct toward understanding himself, developing his capabilities, and creating value in the world. This focused attention creates what Schopenhauer recognized as the foundation of all genuine achievement, the ability to concentrate fully on what matters most without distraction. The single man who understands this achieves something that Schopenhauer considered the highest form of human development: complete sovereignty over his own existence, the ability to choose his path based on his authentic desires rather than inherited expectations, the power to create meaning from his own understanding rather than accepting meaning from others. This is what Schopenhauer meant when he wrote that a man can be himself only so long as he is alone. But here's the final insight that ties everything together. The man who gains the most power from staying single isn't avoiding relationships out of fear or inadequacy. He's choosing solitude from strength and wisdom. He's not running from love. He's running toward something even more valuable: complete ownership of his own life. And that ownership, that sovereignty, that absolute freedom to become exactly who he's meant to become, that's the most powerful thing any human being can achieve. The choice is yours to make. Society will tell you what you should want. Others will project their needs onto your decisions. But Schopenhauer's wisdom cuts through all the noise with one simple truth. The man who learns to be complete in himself gains access to a type of power that no external relationship can provide: the power to live entirely on your own terms. And once you taste that power, you'll understand why the single man terrifies everyone who has never experienced genuine freedom. You've just discovered something that will change how you see every relationship around you. The men who truly understand power, who have tasted genuine freedom, who have learned what it means to be complete in themselves. Now you know why they chose solitude over settlement, independence over interdependence, sovereignty over safety. This knowledge changes everything because now you can't unknow it. You can't unsee the difference between men who choose from strength and those who choose from weakness. Write in the comments, "I choose sovereignty," and let the world know you understand the difference between settling and choosing. Your voice matters because every man who speaks this truth gives permission for others to examine their own choices, to question their own motivations, to consider whether they're living authentically or just following scripts. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications because you're part of a community that values truth over comfort, authenticity over approval, and genuine power over social performance. The insights we explore together challenge everything society wants you to believe about success, relationships, and what it means to live powerfully. Tomorrow's content will reveal another uncomfortable truth that successful people discovered but no one talks about. Something so powerful that understanding it will completely shift how you approach every major decision in your life, and why the people who figured this out early gained advantages that others spend decades trying to achieve.